Today, I will be talking about Aupadhika Bhedabheda, the philosophy of Bhaskara. To understand why Bhaskara arrives at his position, we first need to understand what he rejects. Bhaskara strongly criticizes Mayavada, the Advaita position that the world of difference and plurality is ultimately produced by Maya and does not have independent ultimate reality. His objection is that this seems to make the very things required for the theory itself ultimately illusory. Causality, cognition, experience, scripture, and even the pursuit of liberation all take place within the world that Mayavada ultimately treats as unreal. If the world and causal relations are products of Maya, and Maya itself is ultimately unreal, then the process by which one supposedly escapes Maya is also taking place within that same realm of illusion. Bhaskara especially attacks the Advaitin explanation of Avidya. If Avidya belongs to Brahman, then Brahman itself becomes associated with ignorance, which compromises Brahman's purity and perfection. If Avidya belongs to the Jiva, however, the explanation becomes circular, because the Jiva itself is explained through Avidya. In other words, Avidya is used to explain the Jiva, while the Jiva is then used to explain where Avidya resides. And if Avidya is said to be neither real nor unreal, and is therefore called Anirvachaniya, Bhaskara argues that this still does not satisfactorily explain what Avidya actually is or how it can operate. He also questions how real knowledge could arise from an ultimately unreal condition and then somehow transcend that condition. If knowledge itself belongs to the illusory realm, then it cannot straightforwardly serve as the means of escaping that realm. For Bhaskara, the solution is therefore not to deny the reality of the world and its distinctions, but to understand them as real manifestations of Brahman. This leads to his acceptance of Satkaryavada, the doctrine that an effect already exists implicitly, or in an unmanifest form, within its cause before it is produced. An effect is therefore not something completely new that comes into existence from nothing. Production is instead the manifestation or transformation, or parinama, of what already exists within the cause. For Bhaskara, Brahman is the ultimate Karan, or cause, of the universe. The Jivas and the material world, or Achit, exist within Brahman prior to creation in an unmanifest condition. When creation takes place, these latent realities become manifest as distinct entities. This is why Bhaskara's position is called Parinamavada. Brahman genuinely undergoes transformation into the manifested universe. The effect is therefore both different and non-different from its cause. It is non-different because it consists of the reality of its cause, while it is different because it is manifested in a distinct form. This is Bhedabheda. The Jiva therefore is not an illusion, nor is it merely an apparent modification of Brahman. It is a real karya, or effect, of Brahman. It is non-different from Brahman in its underlying reality, while remaining different as an individual, finite subject. Bhaskara describes the Jiva as an amsha, or part or mode, of Brahman. It is dependent upon Brahman, but it retains its own individual identity. The Jiva's finite condition is explained through Upadhis, or limiting conditions. Avidya, Kama, and Karma sustain its embodied existence and keep it within samsara. Because of these conditions, the Jiva's consciousness is limited or contracted, giving it finite awareness of itself and of other things. This also explains the cycles of creation and Pralaya. At Pralaya, the universe exists in an undifferentiated, unmanifest condition. The Jivas and matter have not disappeared, rather, their differentiated forms are no longer manifest. At the beginning of a new kalpa, Brahman wills creation, and through Hiranyagarbha or Brahma, this latent universe becomes differentiated into its many forms. At the end of the kalpa, This manifested plurality is withdrawn once again into the unmanifest state of Pralaya. So the universe moves between manifestation and unmanifestation, while its reality remains grounded in Brahman. The problem for the Jiva is that, in its embodied condition, it experiences itself as finite. Liberation therefore requires the removal of the conditions that sustain this limitation. Bhaskara teaches Gyana-karma-samuccaya, meaning knowledge and action together, as the means to liberation. Dhyana removes Avidya, while nishkama karma works against the tendency toward finite desire. Meditation, or Dhyana, on Brahman is also central. Brahman is understood as saguna nirkara, formless with qualities. Dhyana is therefore not merely intellectual knowledge. Brahman must be directly apprehended. Bhaskara rejects Jivan-mukti. As long as the Jiva remains embodied, complete liberation has not occurred. Liberation therefore takes place through Videhamukti after death. Meditation destroys sanchita karma, while prarabdha karma continues until death. Bhaskara describes two forms of mukti, Sadyo-mukti, or immediate liberation, and Krama-mukti, or progressive liberation. The final state is Ekibhava, state of oneness. As the Upadhis and the conditions responsible for finite existence are removed, the Jiva's limited consciousness becomes fully expanded in Brahman. Its sense of separateness is dissolved, and the Jiva enters into what is described as the ocean of divine life. However, Bhaskara explicitly distinguishes Ekibhava from Swarupayakya, absolute identity. And this is where I think Bhaskara's position runs into a problem. Because what exactly happens to the Jiva after it attains Ekibhava? Does the Jiva continue to exist as an individual? Or is its individuality completely sublated? It cannot be the latter, because Bhaskara explicitly says that the Jiva continues to exist even after liberation. But if the Jiva does continue to exist, then in what sense does it remain an individual when its sense of separateness has completely dissolved? Bhaskara tells us that the Jiva persists, but he does not clearly explain what this continued individuality consists in once its separateness has been overcome. Here's what I think would have solved this issue. The Mukta Jiva continues to exist as a subtle, distinct self, but its separate perspective has completely dissolved. It no longer possesses an independent will or perspective of its own, but exists like a limb of Brahman. For example, just as our arms and legs have no agency of their own but function entirely as parts of us, the individual selves would therefore remain real, while functioning as extensions of one unified consciousness, a hive mind, if you will.